Right, hey guys, how are we doing? Back another video from Annie News, another cut content video for Season 2 of MUSHOKU Tensei, covering episode 10, I do believe. And this was an interesting one. Very intrigued to see what was left out, because it was a very, what's the phrase? A very slice of life kind of episode. There wasn't a lot of action going on, it was more just like where people are and stuff. But that all there at the end with Rudy not quite finding out who Silent Fitz is. But what he learned was enough for him to be like, okay, yeah, I get it. And looks like he's going to pursue it further because, yeah, his ED is no longer an issue around. Yeah. Anyway, let's get into it. Let's see what's left out. I'm intrigued. I'm really intrigued.
If you've ever wondered how it is someone like Eris could fight the way that she does, well, the answer to that is simply battle aura. It's a term I'm sure you've heard at least once or twice before, but given that the anime doesn't really talk about it, it may be something you're not quite familiar with.
There was no action whatsoever in this episode. Like, what is this about?
Now, you may be wondering what this has to do with a day in the life episode such as this, but
Yeah,
you'd be
that's
surprised to know that battle
exactly
aura
it.
wasn't the only world-building topic omitted from it.
Oh,
There was also Rudeus' new official rank, a lot of new interesting details on magic, then
Okay.
even an apparent connection of curses to gods.
whoa.
So,
Oh,
if any of that piques your curiosity,
Yes.
then stick around as we take a look at what the anime left
Let's
out from
see.
the novels. Episode 34,
okay.
These Feelings,
These
covering
feelings.
chapters 7 and 8 from Volume 9 of the light novel.
Right, so it's like a normal one covering 2 chapters. Seems to be the norm. We've had the odd one, haven't we? It's just like bits and bobs.
With the first half of the episode being more of a day in the life, we'll start things off with Rudy's morning routine. A year had passed since he'd enrolled, and though he didn't know for sure, he was fairly confident his birthday was just recently.
Cool.
This wasn't really all that important though, since in this world, only every 5th birthday was celebrated.
Wow.
So, with today being one just like any other, Rudy
16th,
would kick
right,
things
okay.
off with his usual training session. A workout and run that was then followed up by sword drills. Normally this would be done by himself, but ever since Bodyguardi joined the school and became a student, there were numerous times where he would just stand there and watch. Like, literally stare, remain silent, and nod his head from time to time.
Oh.
With regards to the scene we got in the anime, this would be one of those rare occasions where Bodyguardi would actually say something. And it's the ensuing conversation with Rudy after that brings us to a topic that's actually quite important. So, before Bodyguardi had even asked why Rudeus wanted strength, he first asked if there was any point to him pursuing it. You see, to him a person with so much mana didn't need to. He was confused why Rudy would even attempt to train without first cloaking himself in battle aura. This may very well be a term you've never actually heard before, but for Rudy it was yet another of the countless times that it had been mentioned to him. The thing is, since no one ever went on to explain it, Rudy felt this was the perfect time to finally ask about it. It was a simple inquiry that would lead to just as simple of an answer. When you break it down to its most fundamental level, battle aura was simply mana.
Right.
It was a technique that used mana to dramatically increase the body's physical capabilities,
And Rudy's got freaking loads of it, so... Oh, wow. Okay, yeah.
often strengthening it to unnatural extremes. Ever wonder how Eris was able to cut that snake in half? Well, that would be with the help of battle aura.
Ah, okay.
As for how it worked, the general idea was that a
I just thought she was an absolute freaking badass, okay.
field of mana was
God, I hope she comes back. But that's going to be awkward if things start happening with Rudy and Fitz. Oh, Sylvie. Oh, God.
created, spread all over the body, then pressed tightly to it. I'm sure that doesn't sound too challenging technically, but for some reason, no matter how Rudy manipulated his mana, he could never feel this massive change in strength like how he was supposed to. He tried imitating Super Saiyans and Nen users, but
Ha! Cool. Alright, sick. Love that. Yeah, because he's from... Yeah,
as Bodyguardi himself had said, he simply didn't have the talent for it. It was supposed to be this natural byproduct of extensive physical training, but even with Rudy's multiple years doing such, nothing at all seemed to be coming from it. It made him think that perhaps it just wasn't possible for him. Perhaps he just couldn't generate battle aura the same way everyone else did. As surprising as this was, it wasn't unheard of for people to not be capable of battle aura at all. They could
Right.
be doing the most intense training in the world and still battle aura would fail to manifest around them. So it was very plausible that this was what was happening to Rudy here. It's not like any of this really mattered though, since the last person with as much mana as Rudy chose not to cloak himself in battle aura either.
Right,
It was
okay.
yet another comparison of Rudeus to Laplace. an increasingly common occurrence when it came to any conversation with Bodyguardi. The reason why this is because Bodyguardi was actually one of the few to have met Laplace and lived. He annihilated Body's body with a single blow, but even that wasn't enough to surpass Body's immortality. So it was from that brief encounter that Bodyguardi was able to understand two things about Laplace. The first was that he was an extremely shady character, and the second was that his control over mana was perfect. If there was anything to note about Laplace other than his levels of mana, it was his complete and utter mastery over how to use it. Naturally, this made Rudy curious if he could learn how to fight like that too, but according to Bodyguardi, it simply wasn't possible. You see, if there was ever a time where Rudy tried to use mana the same way Laplace did, he would simply implode from the overload of mana being channeled within him.
Oh god.
It seems Rudy's body wasn't built to support all the mana he was gifted with. So, much like how Deku couldn't support One for All because of how weak his body was, so too is Rudy incapable of using his 100%. He can never reach the true potential his mana should allow him to because, unlike Laplace, his body will never be as sturdy.
Oh my god, imagine that. You've got all that potential and you can't use it. Jesus.
No amount of training would change the fact that he's just this frail human who shouldn't even have this much mana in the first place. With that making Rudy's limitations clear, Bodyguardi would then go on to ask the question from the anime. For what reason did he want to become stronger? There wasn't much more to it than what we got, so the next part of Rudy's day would be his classes. The first of which was Intermediate Detoxification Magic. As a branch of healing that cured ailments and purged poisons, this was the class Rudy hoped would solve his impotence.
Right.
The thing is, the rarer the illness and more potent the poison, the more advanced of a spell you needed to cure it.
Ooh, and we're getting Shield Hero Season 3, aren't we? And I'm excited because I've read that the fans of the original story were like, yeah, Season 2, they definitely sped run it because they wanted to get to the good part, and the good part is what Season 3 is going to cover, so yeah, cool. But Season 2 wasn't that great, was it? But anyway.
You also needed a specific incantation for each individual poison and ailment. So, with this being a magic Rudy couldn't cast silently, that meant there was an extensive amount of memorization involved for it.
Oh, because he's so used to just not having to speak the words, right?
Even more so once you got into the higher ranks. Like, for incantations just at the intermediate level, most, if not all, were phrases several times longer than anything used in offensive magic.
So, like how the Welsh... Right. Anyway.
Combine that with the fact that there were at least 50 of them, and what you get is a tedious field of pure monotony.
Like the Welsh.
It's when you get to the advanced tier that not only are the number of incantations doubled, but so too is the length and the amount of mana required to cast it. The Saint tier fortunately doesn't require much more memorization than before, but the amount of mana once again increases even further. Once you get to the King tier, that's when we start talking about spells created by their own nation-funded research programs. Highly potent poisons and antidotes that are guarded as state secrets after. Usually it's one nation that creates a poison incurable by any other magic, then another nation that has to respond by finding an antidote for it. So this back and forth is kinda like an arms race but with detoxification magic, something that definitely skirts the lines of the Geneva Protocol. Aside from that, for anyone who's unlucky enough to have read an incantation at the King tier, it's likely they'll be reciting the contents of an entire book, at which point whoever's waiting to get healed will probably be dead by the time it's
Jesus,
finished.
right, okay, yeah.
Then, at the final rank of Divine, the only known use of detoxification magic here was for a spell that cured a disease called Petrification Syndrome. It's a rare illness that transforms the mana inside a person's body to stone. Only one person had ever been able to cure this, and the incantation for it is guarded carefully at the Great Cathedral of Milishon.
Of course
In
it
any
is,
case.
because, like, everything's policed. Like, I thought it was mad when he was explaining, like, certain spells cannot be taught because they are, like, pretty much copyrighted by a specific family, and it's like, no one else is allowed this. That's mad.
This was the specifics of detoxification magic as Rudy had learned it. There wasn't anything helpful for curing his impotence, but what he did learn was that if he ever wanted to specialize in it, it was probably best to just carry a book with him. It was once this class was over that lunch would be next and we would get to the scene with Bodyguardi, Julie, and alcohol.
Oh yeah,
For those
booze.
who were wondering, no, this isn't something the school serves regularly. Yes, it was taken from the principal, and
Oh my god, that's so cool.
no, Rudy didn't approve of Julie drinking it.
Right, yeah, because he just casually goes, yep, cool, you have that. She's like, yum, yum, yum.
It wasn't his place to step in and say otherwise, though, since only he thought that she was too young for it. The next period brings us to Rudy's advanced healing class, where surprisingly only Persena was part of it. Apparently, Linnea had enrolled herself into a different course. Persena was a lot more studious, so while she was actively learning in her classes, Linnea, on the other hand, was struggling. She couldn't quite grasp the fundamentals of elemental magic. Of course, that required a basic understanding of elementary level science, but no matter how simply Rudy tried explaining things to her, she just wasn't able to grasp the foundations of it. The core principles of things like evaporation and condensation didn't seem like they were clicking with her. Now, while we are on the topic of elemental magic, it turns out Rudy had just recently passed his test to become a Saint-level Earth Magician.
Cool.
It was a test that required the casting of the Saint tier spell Sandstorm. A fierce torrent of sand and wind that was devastating to anyone caught within it. Not only did it make the entire area...
The old dance tune, Sandstorm. You know it.
Impossible to see through, but
Check it
just
out
breathing
on
became
YouTube.
tough as massive piles of shifting sand raged through the air. So, if Cumulonimbus tested for the manipulation of rain clouds and wind currents, then Sandstorm was the test of one's ability to control massive quantities of tiny particles. With this bringing Rudy to the Saint tier in a second element, he was actually becoming more interested in doing the same for the other two.
Okay.
So, if there was ever a chance
More
that he could track
elemental
down the professors who
magic.
taught them, then he figured he might as well get the Saint rank for all of them.
Hell
An
yeah.
interesting thing that you should know, though, is that despite Rudy only being formally recognized as Saint level, his silent spellcasting is currently more on the King level.
Cool.
At least as dictated by Bodigadi anyway. Since only King tier spells and above could penetrate his battle aura, Rudy was surprised to hear that his Stone Cannon's destructive power was at the Emperor level. He wasn't sure if that meant he could call himself an Emperor level magician, though, since when he asked the professor if he could, they responded in a snide way saying he could call himself whatever he wanted. It was a snarky remark that probably stemmed from their jealousy of him.
Yeah.
So, in hopes of not getting on the professor's bad side, Rudy just kept his titles the way they were. To him, there was no merit in advertising himself as better. Fast forward to the early afternoon, and that's when we get to Rudy's part-time job with Nanahoshi.
Right, helping her
Now
to
that she
put the
finally
mana
had
in the
an infinite
symbols.
source of mana,
Yeah.
she was no longer restraining herself from all the experiments she wanted to do. Before, she only had a finite supply of magic crystals, but now any and every magic circle was being tested. It didn't matter whether she expected the circle to fail or succeed. If it was drawn up and
May as well
fully
try them
made,
all.
she wanted it tested. So, as the number of circles went from the hundreds to thousands, it was clear that Nanahoshi would make and test as many as were necessary. It was as Rudy was warning her not to get carried away that Nanahoshi would respond with something peculiar. You see, Rudy was just trying to warn her not to recreate the displacement incident,
Yeah.
but rather than agree, Nanahoshi instead deflected into an excuse. She responded as if
It's not just experiments, Rudeus. Things always go wrong no matter what we do.
messing up was inevitable.
Damn.
That's not to say she was purposefully trying to recreate the displacement
Yeah.
incident, but it seems returning home may be taking precedence over safety.
Oh, yeah, she hates the place. She absolutely despises the place, doesn't she? So, yeah.
Regardless, it was clear Nanahoshi was slowly working towards something. She couldn't tell Rudy what it was, but at the very least, there was a plan here. Now, given how these summoning sessions had been going on for some time, there were actually days when Sylphie would show up and join him. Her involvement didn't last very long though, as the whole experimentation process was actually quite mana-intensive. After only about 20 spells, Sylphie found herself completely empty. It turns out just one was the equivalent of casting an advanced spell.
Damn. Rudy's got loads of freaking mana. He got mana. He's a mana king.
That may just be a drop in the bucket of mana that Rudy has, but for someone like Sylphie who has more mana than most, even she couldn't keep up with these summoning experiments. Once again showcasing just how much more mana Rudy has over everyone. Rudy wasn't sure why it is summoning costed so much more than offensive magic, but he figured since it was akin to a powerful spell you'd only cast once, a higher cost was understandable. It would be a bit OP to be able to spam summons and create your own army of them.
Hell yeah, it
I mean,
was.
if you've read Solo Leveling, then you'd know what I'm talking about.
Oh, I haven't, and I'm glad, because we're getting an anime, aren't we? Like, I think I nearly bought the first volume. I flicked through some pages of the first volume of the manhwa, and I was like, this looks cool. And I've seen loads of stuff and people talking about certain fights, and then as soon as the anime got announced, it's like, I'm gonna wait for that. I'm gonna wait for that. Same with Undead Unluck. Although no, I read the first like 3 volumes of Undead Unluck, and I just kind of felt this was more of a it needed an anime adaptation. I just wasn't really enjoying the manga as much as I should. So really glad that that's got an anime adaptation. And Kaiju number 8 is a really enjoyable manga. I absolutely love it, and I think the manga is going to be sick. Zone 100, I read that every time a volume comes out, and I've just waiting for the season to end to binge it, if you know what I mean. Because apparently I've seen as well there's like certain release dates on that. Oh, why am I talking about that? Right, let's get back into this.
The thing about these experiments that didn't make sense was the fact that even though a summoning would produce nothing, the same amount of mana would be drained as if it had produced something. It was an adverse side effect Rudy attributed to trying to summon things from a different world. Now, it was after Rudy's job was done that he would usually walk back home with Sylphie. It was on this specific instance of doing so that Sylvie would say it was okay to walk between the girls' dorms again. This, of course, being the path Rudy was on while being accused of thievery.
Yeah. Oof.
He'd been avoiding it ever since, but apparently with the help of Linnea and Prasenna, his image had shifted from that of a pervert to one of a gentleman.
Okay.
Supposedly the two had spread the message that he was a nice guy, a fair boss who would never hurt the weak. So, with that changing the girls' opinions on him for the better, many would start to look up to Rudy with admiration. Sure, his clothing was a bit shabby and face sometimes gloomy, but the fact he didn't abuse his power was admirable. Rudy would then go and eat dinner, and after that was figure-making lessons with Julie. Each were given their own little project to work on, but Rudy's was now a 1/8 scale figure of FITZs. He couldn't proceed any further than this though, because in addition to FITZ's clothing always blocking his body shape, Rudy also wasn't sure what to put for his private parts.
Oh, is that explains like him being confused about the breasts growing on it, wouldn't it?
Naturally leading Zanaba to offer to sneak up behind Fitz and rip his clothes off.
Of course.
It was before Rudy would go to bed that he would take a bit of time to read the book that Nanahoshi had given him. A story that went by the name of Sig's Summoning. Sig was a witch who often summoned powerful fiends, but after offering more mana than she should have, she ended up summoning a beast that she couldn't control anymore, resulting in her death by getting eaten by it. So, this wasn't particularly useful in learning about summoning itself, but it does teach the important lesson of summoning within your limits. Like, if Rudy was to summon the strongest creature his mana would allow him to, it's very likely it would just end up killing him. In any case, this would be a day in the life of Rudy, bringing us now to the next day where he would get to meet Soldat.
So cool. I'm glad that they got to meet up again.
The reason he was even in town to begin with was because him and every other party within the Thunderbolt clan were summoned to the city to fight the Demon King.
Oh, okay, yeah, because he didn't explain why they were there. Alright, cool.
The request had already been cancelled by the time they got here, but since every party was already present, the leader of Thunderbolt decided to have their mandatory yearly meeting early.
Cool.
Leading Soldat to take advantage of the opportunity and reach out to Rudy. Now, that conversation where Rudy was talking about curses with Cliff had actually taken place while the two were on their way to meet Soldat. It was him, Alina Lise, and Cliff all walking to the city discussing what they knew about curses.
And he was like, what's a slut like you doing with a guy like that? Jesus.
Of the topics that were discussed, something that really stood out was the apparent obscure knowledge the man god was always sharing with him. In the past, the man god had told him about the spurred spears and how blessed and cursed children were one and the same, but when Rudy had relayed that knowledge to others, neither Cliff nor Alina Lise knew what he was talking about. Apparently, information like that wasn't as common as the man god made it seem. It was as Rudy contemplated these arcane facts more closely that he came to the realization that curses likely had a connection to the gods. You see, not only did the three he knew of all possess at least one, but blessed children were also supposedly divine somehow. That could just all be a coincidence, but perhaps it also pointed to a deeper connection of some sort. In any case, the rest of that encounter was pretty much as we saw. Cliff didn't like the way Soldat called Alina Lise a slut, but after recounting all his adventures...
Of course, like, what the hell? You're not just gonna... Because in the anime he did, he was just like, whatever, but like, yeah, you wouldn't. You would be like, what? No, I'm sat right here, she's me missus, don't be like that.
...adventures from the past year, Cliff forgot his anger and instead became enthralled by him, leading Alina Lise to suggest that the two should go on an adventure together. When we get to Rudy's encounter with Fitz and Pseudo-Fitz after, there's honestly not much more that I can add to it. There was an extra scene where Rudy blackmailed a professor to find out Fitz's gender, but even a stone cannon up the butt wasn't enough to get him to talk. Then, to clarify on that final sentence before the big reveal, the reason Rudy had even said what he did was because in his mind he had just come to terms with how he really felt. He was done talking in euphemisms and instead listed out all the things he wanted to do with FITZs.
Oh my, right, okay, damn.
Obviously, most of it was in his head mentally, but a little bit did blurt out right at the end there, leading Fitz to interrupt and ask Jerk what off. But yeah, that was pretty much it for today's cut content. Now, before I go, I just want to thank Reverse 1999 for sponsoring.
That was cool. That was awesome. Like, again, it's always nice to see the little bits of world building and stuff that's left out. Interesting. Very interesting to see what happens next, though, now that Rudy's like, ooh, I know that Fitz is a girl, but I'll help him keep it a secret. But then it's like, he's obviously going to want to, because it's helped him down there with his ding-dong, and he's going to want to pursue that. But then it's finding out who it is, and is that going to change things? But anyway, we'll find out next time, I guess. But until then, thank you to my patrons. If you want to have your name at the end of every video I upload, link in the description to the Patreon page. $1 a month is all I support. That's greatly appreciated. Thank you for that. Thank you all for watching. What do you guys think of that? What did you guys think of this? Click like, subscribe if you haven't. Leave comments down below. Let me know that I should watch this in future videos. And I'll see you guys, all you guys, next time.